Have you ever tried to imagine the far future? Even though we live in an age defined by our technology, humanity seems poised to boldly continue to march into a new world of far future technologies. Coming are the days of orbital rings, Dyson swarms, and molecular nanotechnology. Futurism provides us glimpses of these future technologies and what we might do with them. Through advancing technology, we will colonize other worlds and improve life on this one. Perhaps the most interesting question of all to ask is, will you be around to see it unfold? If things like life extension biotechnology continue to head in the direction that they currently are, it could be that people alive today may still be alive centuries or more from now. Or perhaps we'll merge with our technology, in some way making ourselves technologically nearly immortal. Though it must be noted that even with the most advanced far future technologies, there must always come a time when existence must come to an end. What technology cannot defeat is the aging of the universe itself.
Welcome to Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Joining John today is longtime friend Isaac Arthur, host of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur on YouTube. A physicist and a futurist, Isaac explores the possibilities of the future of humanity on his channel, and also speculative looks at what alien civilizations might be like, science fiction, and of course, explorations of the solutions to the Fermi Paradox.
Isaac Arthur, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, John.
It's my pleasure, man. We've been interacting for a long time on YouTube, and it just seemed like this would be the perfect interview for October. Now, Isaac, we both started in a similar way, accidentally, on YouTube. We uploaded videos that we thought might get a certain amount of views, people we know, and then all of a sudden they go crazy. In my case, that was Over Tabby Star, which has since, become a not so interesting story. But back then in 2016, it was huge. And yours was the idea of megastructures. What could be built in the far, far future, or what aliens might even build? Out of the things you talk about, the megastructures, what is the least likely for us to see? I know a lot of people talk about Dyson Spheres, and I don't know that those are feasible. What's your view?
Well, I think the classic Dyson Sphere, the solid one, that's probably fairly unlikely, except maybe as a very thin solar collector, nobody living on it. The Dyson Swarm itself is really more just an expansion concept of many different megastructures all orbiting around the same star. And that one to me seems almost like an inevitable thing that's going to happen. In terms of the least, the thing is, we say the least likely ever be built, something like a hoop world or donut world, you'd say, well, why would you ever build that? But kind of societies that build things like that, the weirder it is, the more likely it is someone will do it at least once. So, you might be billions of these habitats or structures, but you still have that one that was built as a flat earth or as a donut or built as a cube. And so I think you would see some pretty strange ones get built eventually, but the ones that I think you'd see the most, of course, are the rotating habitats, your neocylinders or bigger.
So rotating habitats essentially creating eventually a Dyson swarm where you have, many habitats and maybe energy collectors and things like that. And that it might be detectable from a distance if you were looking for, SETI.
I usually say the analogy to make on a Dyson swarm is not to think of it as a megastructure itself, but more like a city full of buildings. Those buildings are going to change over time, they'll come in many different forms, but the city is, pretty much a constant of itself, and that's what the swarm is more like.
Right, so if you have a civilization that lasts for billions of years, their constantly evolving Dyson swarm is going to be, that would actually be a technosignature in itself, would be a changing profile based on something that could only be technological, I would imagine. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah. I think it's a lot like taking a photograph of a continent from orbit. It's going to change over time, but the basic format stays more or less the same-ish. So you'll be able to spot it, you're never going to miss that continent, but the specific layout isn't going to look the same 1,000 years after people first, live there. Who knows what the place is going to look like 10,000 years later. But the general notion is they're using up all that energy, or they're using all that space, because they want to stay close enough for communications. And even if you're not using a star, you're still going to end up in something that looks a lot like a Dyson sphere in terms of its waste heat, because you can't get any closer than that. Or you start basically evaporating away under your own waste heat, so you'd still end up with one that might be a different size, though.
A lot of these ideas, like the Dyson swarm, actually the Dyson sphere is a very old idea. I think that goes back to Olaf Stapledon in the 30s.
Starmaker, I think it was in it.
Yeah, but the actual Dyson swarm, which is as Freeman Dyson had conceived it, is a 1960s idea. And so are things like the Kardashev scale, or even searching for SETI beacons. So do you think, because we're still essentially functioning in SETI on ideas from the 1960s, do you think these are actually out of date now, and that the reason we don't see a Kardashev Type 3 civilization is because civilizations don't pursue that level of development? Or do you think do you think the ideas in which we base all this, are they outdated?
I mean, to a degree. Obviously, we have to change our perspective as we get new technologies and insights, but the Kardashev scale and the Dyson swarm are very basic concepts in of themselves. It's the idea is that you want to make use of your sun, or its mass at the very least, and that a civilization is going to grow until it pretty much maxes one out. Where the Kardashev scale is concerned, that's really just assuming the same thing, that you're going to max out your area and that you'll produce waste heat, so they could be wrong, but for them to be wrong, it pretty much requires there to be something wrong with thermodynamics as a basic concept, and there could be somebody finds a way to grab energy on the cheap from dark energy, and so they just go set up shop where they want, or someone figures out how to warp space-time Doctor Who style, and everybody lives inside a box that's 1 meter across on the outside, but the size of a universe on the inside,
In which case, you could make the case that the one solution to the Fermi Paradox is that we're simply looking in the wrong place, because we tend to point radio telescopes at star systems and things like that because it's convenient. But in fact, an alien civilization may abandon a star system and function on some other completely different model out in deep space.
Oh, sure, yeah. The key thing with SETI, it makes sense to do the radio signals approach first, because you're going for the low-hanging fruit. If you're looking for a civilization, the easiest thing to do is look for them talking to you. The next most obvious way is say, well, if we're such a civilization, what are we doing that's going to be really obvious to an outside looker? And that would be, the infrared waste heat of a civilization. If those assumptions are wrong, then, you obviously keep expanding your search. But at the same time, to make a useful search, you have to have certain parameters, and we have to use the current laws of physics for that. So if thermodynamics gets tossed out in another century, then we'll have to, change a lot of things, and the SETI search will be the least important of those. But the biggest one that I always go for, it's kind of the Hart conjecture model, is this assumption that species are going to keep spreading out into areas they value. And so if we assume the universe has a value to them, and it might not. I mean, if you learn how to create matter and energy from nothing, then who cares about the rest of the universe other than to explore it? But as long as matter and energy have a value to them, then they should be spreading out to take advantage of that until they bump into people. And so it should be really easy to spot these civilizations, because you shouldn't even need a telescope. You should be able to look outdoors where they've set up, Syrian Starbucks, of Hamburger joint from Vega. These places should be on Earth already. And that's kind of the first biggest problem with the Fermi Paradox is some conclusion you're having has to be, some fundamental concept we have has to be wrong for it to make sense. Even with the rare earth or rare technology scenarios we discuss, we tend to assume life is going to evolve almost any place it can, and that it should evolve towards intelligence, and that intelligence should value technology. So either that assumption is wrong, which does seem like the most likely scenario, is that we just overestimate how likely technological civilizations are to arise, or some other fundamental, paradigm of our existence has to be wrong. Maybe it's thermodynamics, maybe it's the size of the universe, maybe we're, in a simulated universe that only has us, whatever it is, some fundamental paradigm has to be wrong for us to answer the Fermi Paradox.
Now, regarding the Fermi Paradox, of course, there are many, many possible solutions. What one do you suspect is at heart? I have one, and I'll get into that in a minute, but what do you suspect that the most likely solution is?
Rare technology. I think it's going to be a combination of filters, of course, but how likely is life to arise? Life might be very likely, or it might be very unlikely, but if it's very unlikely, then maybe technology is likely. It just doesn't happen much. I figure somewhere along the chain between when life starts and when it starts making radios, there's got to be some filters in place that really make that less likely. So I usually say rare technology rather than rare Earth, because I don't think Earth is going to turn out to be all that rare, and I don't personally think that life will turn out to be too rare. Maybe even intelligence is common, but very rarely develops technology. I just think that you get a combination of filters that make technology a very rare thing, and I think that I would say that one's the area where I think it's a 50-50 chance, whereas most other ones I put as pretty improbable. So it, to me, is the clear forerunner, but nowhere near solid yet.
The one that gets me, the one that I can't get past, is the leap from prokaryotic to eukaryotic life. Because it took Earth 1.8 billion years, Earth life, to do that, to actually make that leap. And it asks a microbe to absorb and incorporate something into itself rather than digest it. And that just doesn't seem to me to be very likely. So when I look at the universe, I think in terms of a microbial universe, where analogs of prokaryotes may be everywhere. They may be everywhere in our solar system. We may find them at Europa. We may find them underneath the surface of Mars. But what we might not find are the eukaryotes.
That's always struck me as one of the easier ones to sell on is anytime you have a step in evolution that seems to have taken a long time, that's a good pick for a filter. Anytime you have something multiply, like, let's say, multicellular life, say, it can't be multicellular life, that's evolved on Earth like a couple dozen times. Or it can't be something like the eyeball, because that's evolved independently a couple dozen times. Something like eukaryotes, that is a very probable one, because again, a billion years from then to when they developed? And the same one, when did the brain first pop in? A complex brain that took up a large percentage of mass. But I would say I would not be surprised to find prokaryotic life everywhere, but complex multicellular life almost nowhere, just because they've never made that jump to essentially to absorbing another organism. And we see that with like mitochondria, right? That's our powerhouse. We would not be what we are without that. Yet that is, as best we can tell, that's another organism we ate, but did not digest. So that's another one that I would say is a pretty good chance too. And, it might be that something like that is 1 in a billion, and there's your answer right there to the Fermi Paradox, or it might be something where it's only 1 in 10 and these things just keep stacking up. Evidence-wise, it's why I say rare technology is the only one I can be sure about is that technological life is very rare. Whether that's because almost nobody ever gets around to inventing complex technology and all the universe is full of civilizations that are basically cavemen, or whether it's because every planet's covered in algae and nothing more complex. I don't think we're there yet to be able to say for sure, but if I had to put money down, I would say the eukaryotic one would definitely be a good filter.
I think that would probably be filter number one, so to speak, but there are many others. You could say that absence of plate tectonics, not allowing for a carbon cycle could, sink an exoplanet, or...
Oh yeah, well, there always used to be the moon was the example, but then they did a model saying that maybe 1 in 12 planets, or something like that, 5% of planets that are Earth-like would probably have a large moon. So that one didn't turn out to be too great of a filter. But it could be a bunch of minor filters stacking up, or there could be some really big ones. And it doesn't have to be either or, it can be all of the above. We can say probably less than 1 in a trillion planets develops intelligent life, or has developed it yet. It should get more common as time goes on. But I would say the number is probably more like 1 in a quadrillion or even quintillion.
So even when you begin to eliminate the possibilities of, all of these filters, it's still, given the size of the universe and the abundance of galaxies and stars, it's still overwhelmingly likely that there has been or will be or is someone else somewhere. They just may be very distant.
Mm-hmm.
So in which case the solution to the Fermi Paradox is distance. We're just simply distant, which unfortunately creates a situation where we may never know about other intelligent alien life because it may simply be too far away.
There could be some giant K3 civilization that predates us by 100 million years, but they're 101 million light years away, so we just haven't quite seen them yet. But then you start getting that time factor the further you look, the further back in time you're going. But the amount of volume you're looking at and the amount of stars once you get up to the larger scale where things get homogeneous again, that's going up with the cuboid distance. So you look at an area that's 1 billion light years across, it's got 1/8 the volume of an area that's 2 billion light years across. You say, well, we'd see anything within 500 million years ago that was in that 1 billion light year diameter bubble, whereas we'd see things that were 1 billion years ago in the 2 billion light year diameter one, but that one has 8 times as many stars in it. And so it does seem like the further out you're looking, the less likely it's going to be until you get to about maybe 3 billion years ago, and you start saying, well, I can't see anything having evolved to K3 status 3 billion years ago. That maybe that's a little bit too early. And I think you can start putting a stamp on it realistically probably about 4 billion years ago, because you didn't even start having high metallicity planets until about 8 billion years ago, any sort of real large numbers. But there's the other aspect that gets into this is those kind of planets get more common as the universe gets older. And the ones that do evolve life have had more time for that to get complex. So maybe 5 billion years ago, only a handful of planets could realistically support life. Another billion years later, that's going to have gone up. And those handful that did have life have had an extra billion years to catch up on evolution. So, I think we're probably the first, certainly in this galaxy, unless we got a really, really strange flaw in our thinking about this stuff. But I think if you were to jump back, a couple billion years from now, you'd probably find life all over the place, even if people hadn't colonized.
It could be argued that we're early in the game and that we're first in the Milky Way. Which actually leads to two possibilities. That at some point, say we survive and we're around for billions of years as a civilization, that someone else will arise, but also an idea that we took on with one of our collaborations is that we may end up creating the aliens.
Oh yeah, and you think about if we do ever find a solution to being able to go faster than light, the game does change a bit, but I don't expect us to ever do that. But as long as you're constrained by the speed of light, you are not going to have cohesive civilizations. We don't have cohesive civilizations on this planet, and we're less than a light second away from each other. Trying to do that even at the solar system scale is going to be iffy. You start trying to do that at the galactic scale, even if you have extended lifespans, 100,000 years to get a hello back from from Central Command back on Earth is not going to work out well for a civilization.
No, but that brings into another dimension, because if we tackle life extension and we can make humans live for many, 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 many hundreds of thousands of years, nobody ever lives forever, but if you can somehow do that, these time frames, these distances shrink a bit, don't they?
There's two ways they can kind of shrink. We were talking about the black hole forming civilizations that might exist after all the stars have died off. In those, time effectively does slow down because the universe is a very dull and boring place, and you're sipping at tiny amounts of energy to run on, though you're doing it hyper efficiently. In that sense, time genuinely slows. But in the context of like us, for instance, if we start going the digital immortality route, the cyborg AI thing, those people exist at probably a much faster subjective time rate than we do, running at we move at about the speed of sound in terms of our thinking. A computer should be running at the speed of light, so they're probably experiencing about 1 million times as much subjective time, or even more, because they can get away with crunching a brain down smaller in that context. Whereas, the universe is pulling along at 1 million years for an event for a galaxy, because that's more or less how long it takes to get, whatever a second is for us. That to get interaction at the galactic scale, you're pretty much talking about 100,000 to 1 million years, because it's got to go back and forth. You try to have a civilization where everybody experiences a year in a minute of real time that has a time lag of 100,000 years to get a yes back to a simple question. I don't see that working out too well. That doesn't mean people don't colonize. You always colonize, but or I would think you would always colonize, but that doesn't mean they're really talking, not really keeping a coherent system in place. I think even if they're long-lived, I just don't see it happening, even with the extended lifespan, just because even if they're not experiencing a subjectively faster rate of time, it's an eternity to hear back from anybody.
Yeah, an extremely long communications time. Now, you don't believe we're ever going to have FTL, faster than light travel.
No, I don't see it in the codes. I mean, it's who can say, of course, we've only been at the science thing for 400 years and relativity for a century now. And, well, it has been a century since general relativity even. But in that whole time, nobody has managed to even nick it. It's every time we thought we had something, it fell apart on us. And it's been thousands of years since we discovered that 2 + 2 = 4, and no one's disproved that either. And I think that's going to turn out to be the case for FTL, too.
I think my biggest problem with it is that any of the proposed ways to circumvent it always seem to require some type of exotic matter that we have absolutely no idea if that can even exist. It's allowed by science hypothetically.
Well, it's not even so much say it's allowed; it's that it's not banned explicitly.
Right.
And it's say, well, you got imaginary matter, or imaginary mass, or imaginary time. Say, well, okay. I could have an imaginary length on paper. I can have a negative length on paper. I can't hand someone a bucket that's got -5 gallons of water in it, but I can certainly use that number. And the fact that I can put on a piece of paper -5 gallons of water, and that makes complete sense for accounting, still doesn't allow me to actually take a sample of that. And now we do have some examples of off-shell mass, or imaginary mass at the quantum scale, and so again, it's not explicitly banned is the better way to think of it, but if somebody does find a way around it, that's great. I mean, but for the Fermi Paradox, it's just death. I mean, right now we can at least say nobody from another galaxy has really had time to develop and visit us yet. You get FTL in play, you start to worry about what's going on, not just in the observable universe, but outside the observable universe, which is probably much larger than what we can see right now.
Yeah, it could be infinite even. No one knows. Now, I think probably the biggest, most well-known concept for circumventing the speed of light would be the Alcubierre drive. What kills it, in your view?
From the get-go is that negative energy, negative mass thing, but I think, that people often miss this stuff. We can't get a ship up to a fraction of the speed of light because it's too energy intensive. And what always gets skipped on a lot of the FTL is people forget that even when those systems theoretically work, usually the energy requirements, they're like the visceral wormhole theoretically be done with just like one Jupiter mass, but that's still an entire Jupiter mass. The original wormhole concepts called for several hundred solar masses, and things like the Alcubierre drive, that thing requires an insane amount of energy to get working. And I've seen some models that say you could maybe do it with only a few hundred kilograms of negative mass. That's a little iffy, but even if we took that as true, a kilogram is a trillion atoms. We haven't found a single atom yet of this stuff, so if somebody managed to actually get me a stable negative mass particle in the lab, I'll revisit it. And nothing against Alcubierre. He said right from the get-go it was a theoretical idea for fun that he didn't think would work. And there's no reason not to investigate these things, but I think people jump the gun a lot on assuming things like that are right. I mean, how many years do we have the EM drive going on before that finally died off, and you get an anomaly in science, you pin it down first, but these days it ends up in a pop sci article instead, and people say, oh, that's cool. And I don't have a problem with that, except that when they do that, and a couple years later it's proven wrong, they assume that happens for normal science all the time. And so they start thinking, oh, science is wrong about this, science is wrong about that, and so, well, one person produced a theory that we said was probably wrong from the get-go, and you're holding that against the entire community for decades,
Right. And on that note, we have to go to break. We'll be back in a minute.
If you'd like to support Event Horizon, you'll be pleased to know we've recently launched a Patreon. Link in the description below. Or alternatively, you can use your cellular telephone to scan the assemblage of squares on screen now. Here at Event Horizon, we take our listeners' health and well-being very seriously, so now would be a good time to refill your beverages. I recommend tea, iced and with lemon. And this is what happens when Americans write your scripts.
And we're back with Isaac Arthur, host of Science and Futurism here on YouTube. Isaac, we were talking before the break about the Alcubierre drive and the infeasibility of it. And we didn't even get into what happens when you actually have to stop such a thing, if you can get it started. But say barring FTL travel in the Milky Way, as humans spread out and colonize the galaxy at sublight speed, what do you see how do you envision the ultimate human future? Do you think that we will simply colonize just a few systems, or will we actually become a Kardashev Type 3 civilization?
I think that we would end up, again, well, it always depends on what we mean by civilization. Humanity started off in, I think Ethiopia is the current list for that. We did go through a phase where everybody spread out. And say that wasn't a civilization, obviously. The civilization, would be lucky to stretch 10 miles at that point for any given chunk of it. And, if you did discover fast light travel a billion years down the road, someone might be able to reunite all the various fragments of humanity. But in the meantime, it's not going to stop people from going out and colonizing things. And, you get spread out across the entire galaxy and say, well, if you can't talk these people, who is sending those colony missions? But that's not really how that works. A tribe didn't, you have some tribe in Ethiopia, from Ethiopia originally, that's up there in Siberia. They didn't phone home to Ethiopia to ask if they should go ahead and cross the Bering Strait and check out those Americas. The same thing's going to happen with these colonies. The question is timeline. You get to a certain point of expansion where all your expansion is taking place near the edge of the expansion. Nothing's coming from the home world anymore because it's too far of a trip for them to make. Those folks are going to keep expanding, but at different rates and individually, right? This planet will say, well, we're starting to get a little bit full and we want to spread out. That might be one way it happens. Or it might just be someone on that planet decides, hey, let's go found a new planet in this empty system. And I think that's going to drive this sort of thing. It's just a time. Are they going to do it fast or are they going to do it slow? You might colonize a galaxy quickly in just a few 100,000 years, for obviously a relative value of quick there, or it might take 1 billion years, but from an astronomical timeline, that's nothing,
Right. If you have a civilization that's going to last for billions and billions of years, the time frames shrink again. You end up with a much smaller galaxy, so to speak. But you also did an episode once where you envisioned how you could go from this galaxy to another galaxy. How would you do that?
One of the key aspects of intergalactic space is that it's not really all that empty. It's a lot more thinned out than it is here, but there are still stars there. So you don't actually have to go from one galaxy to the other and make this 2 million light year trip completely in one shot. You're leaving from the edge of your galaxy, and which is a very hazily defined thing anyway. I think we had the terminus system there. A bit of a nod to what the word means, of course, but Isaac Asimov's Foundation series were all around terminus. There's not going to be stars nearby, but there will be some within maybe 1,000 light years. And you've already gotten used to making trips of that kind of duration by then if you got into the edge of the galaxy. So you go and you found that one, and there's another one that's only about another 1,000 light years away, and you head off to that one, and you eventually just bridge the gap. And folks doing that are probably intend to colonize that other galaxy, so they're probably all heading out a lot faster. Now, what colonizing another supercluster, which you could do, that is a whole other ballgame, because at that point, unless you really are just staging it the one little galaxy at a time, you often would have to be talking about doing trips that were, millions of years before you even ran into a star you could use.
But if your spaceship, so to speak, say you've created a generational ship, if that is your reality, if that is your home, then such trips might not be so bad. Especially if you made it sufficiently large to where it was like walking around Chicago, then you could spend that amount of time on something and hop between galaxies.
It's actually our episode for next week, the Arc of a Million Years, or the Million Year Arc. I keep changing the title back and forth. Is trying to examine what happens inside these things if you build them that big and that long. And say, we have an example of a spaceship that is designed to last for billions of years, and it's the one we live on already. And when you're talking about colonizing other galaxies, the idea of making a spaceship the size of a planet might seem absurd to you and me, but when you're throwing around, Kardashev 3 resources, that's nothing, Building something the size of a planet, and it shouldn't need to be that big, but, you're not talking about a little spaceship anymore. You're talking about building something that is probably got a population in the tens of millions, if not billions, and that's what you're throwing at another galaxy. And it might be some multi-system project that many people are working on, or it could be something, again, even a Kardashev 2 civilization, one that's just got one solar system to itself. They can throw something like that at a project. They can get away with throwing a whole planetary mass at this project of going and colonizing Andromeda. In that kind of context, it might take them millions of years to arrive, and they might change their mission profile many times, so you might need to do it many times to make sure it has a better chance of success. But that is a whole civilization of itself. When you talk about trips that last thousands of years, or even just centuries, let alone millions of years, that is, the whole human civilization is basically a period of 4,000 years. You can go back further than that, but that's basically where history started. Even the entire time we've been biologically human is not much over 100,000. We deal with timelines like that on one of those ships. That's what you're talking about. And you think about how much things have changed since the days of Ur and Hammurabi until now. That's what it's like inside one of these ships. That's how long they have to this cultural changing. And I think even with life extension, you're going to have so much changes to culture in that time that they'd often forget what their mission was, or they'd arrive and most of them would say, let's stay on the ship. We'll go see another place. And that's one of the reasons why the Goddard ship concept is the idea that you're not sending a colony ship to another system, but rather a big ship that stops at systems, colonizes them, moves on to the next one, colonizes them, etc. And at each stop, it picks up new resources to make colonial gear and to stay alive in that time, and it just drops off whatever chunk of its population feels like doing that, and then on the rest of the trip, they breed up new people.
So, Isaac, you mentioned life extension. Now, I think life extension is going to be something over the not so distant future. This is something that's going to be fairly close, and maybe something that we're really undergoing already. When do you think we will start seeing leaps in extending the human lifespan?
I'd say about a century ago. A concept that's really hard to miss, and I was working with the SENS Research Foundation on this recently, and it's a point they make a lot too, is all medicine is life extension technology. And so many things that we associate to aging in the past, that we call natural causes in the past, things like cancer in general, these are age diseases. And as you beat them, that is anti-aging technology. Every time someone, takes a treatment that extends our average lifespan, say, well, you're not increasing the maximum life, you're just increasing the average. And say, they're kind of the same thing in this context. As you extend people's lifespans, with any medicine, that is already anti-aging technology. And when you actually start picking apart the individual things that cause aging, most of these are essentially things we're already starting to work on. Many of the things that we're looking at for life extension, we've got an episode coming up on this actually that we collaborate with Aubrey de Grey and the SENS Research Foundation on. When we look at those individual types of SENS, self-senescence therapies and strategies, they are things that we are already working on for other things like Parkinson's or Gaucher's disease or quite a few of the others. The research on those is the same research we'll be using for life extension. The hard part, though, is there are a couple of things that have to be focused on specifically for aging, but it's trying to convince people this is something that this is not a radical technology of the deep future or will never happen, but something that we're already doing right now. And if we can just kind of get over this mental hurdle of thinking of it as sci-fi technology, but something we're working on right now, then we can start pulling in more minds on it, pulling in more funding on it, and actually start making the visible progress people would like. But at the same time, we already are getting that progress. So you look at the average human lifespan, it goes up about 1 year for every 5 or 6 that passes. And I say, that counts to me, and when I was a kid, I remember it was a big deal when George Burns turned 100, and that almost never happened. Now it's hard to find a city or a village that doesn't have somebody over a century old, and I think that's just going to keep going up, and they talk about a maximum lifespan. When we start looking at that, they are actually specific things that seem to kill people off from that should be treatable. It's just, typically the body's already in such bad condition from other things by that point that, say a stiff breeze will kill you. If we start getting rid of all those other little illnesses that will get you on the way there, we should be able to tackle that one too.
Now, the case has been made that there are people alive now that may well live 1,000 years. Do you think we're that close to that?
Oh yeah. No, there's the concept of an escape velocity or a longevity takeoff, which says at a certain point you are improving your technology for life extension faster than people are actually aging, so that somebody born today might never die of old age. I think we hit that point quite some time ago, but I'm very confident that people being born nowadays will probably not die of old age, except in some kind of more metaphysical sense that at 10,000 you get bored of life and off yourself, etc.
He made YouTube videos for 5,000 years.
I think even I would probably want to move on after that point. I mean, I love what I do, but maybe not 5,000 years worth of love.
I'm going at least 5,000 years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years of JMG videos. So now some people would say, well, that's disturbing. You know, 1,000-year-old human. It's unnatural. But yet, essentially, so is a 100-year-old human, or even a 50-year-old human. So, if we went back 40,000 years, living to 30 might have been something that most people didn't get to because of, lack of antibiotics. So,
on the one hand, I mean, you had people in the past, they died of more things, so very few people died of old age. But at the same time, all you have to do is look at photographs of about a century ago when we first started having those, and you see someone who was 60 and say, oh, well, that person hasn't died yet. They're breaking the curve. They say, well, they look a lot older than what we think of as 60 nowadays. Statistical average, I should be dead by now, but most people, humans who ever lived, their life expectancy early 30s. But, this is not, we're not really aging at the same rate. That kind of wear and tear, that damage isn't hitting us quite as fast because we have these healthier lifestyles. So to a degree, we do age slow. It's not just a matter of we have more people living to those ages, it's that's actually getting pushed back a bit.
Right, and it's just simply a matter of no matter how long you extend life, eventually something's going to get you. You're still eventually going to, if you remain a biological being, eventually.
Oh, even if you don't. We had the one episode, Digital Death, where we tried to look at what would happen if you, because say, if you upload a mind, you can make copies, you can have redundant ones, no one's ever going to get all of them. And it's not that hard to raise the probability of somebody getting all your secret stashes to less than the chance of it happening once in the entire universe existing. You got 1 million backups spread out the galaxy, no one's going to get them all simultaneously. But at a certain point, you're still going to die anyway because the life experience of 5 million years... can you even call that seed of a person you anymore at that stage? There's continuity of consciousness, maybe, but it's like saying the original bacteria that used to divide from which we all descended is still alive to this day, and one could make that argument to a degree. Certainly, some of the atoms from it are still around, and it kept, it divided, and it's still the original cell in some ways. But that's not, I'm not that original amoeba anymore. And I think that's what you're talking about when you start talking about life expectancies in the millions of years.
Yeah, if you go millions of years. And then even, you get into questions like one interruption in that consciousness, say you're part of a machine civilization, one interruption, you may have actually end up forgetting your original life and not really even knowing your origins.
Yeah. What are the odds? You have that moment where you say, I just want to get rid of the past and erase these memories. And say, what are the odds someone's going to do that? And say, can you see someone every 10,000 years just having a frustration moment? They say, screw it all, I'm deleting those memories. If that sort of thing statistically happens, to people every 10,000 years, that becomes your half-life, as it were. Someone just erases their memory at some point in time, and now they're a new entity for all practical purposes. Although that depends on what one's view of consciousness and identity is, whether one goes with Locke or one of the other methods out there.
One could even make the case that if the inevitability of a society is to become a machine civilization, which some people bet that that's going to happen, a machine civilization may choose to erase its own biological memory collectively, meaning that it purges biology from its memory because there's no real use to maintaining those memories. So you could have a machine civilization that has no idea that it was once biological, which, imagine that for humanity, we someday forget that we're human or were human.
Well, the Kardashev 3 example is, you got all these civilizations spread out. It's a K3 civilization, but it's not a civilization. You come back in 1 billion years and people are arguing over whether or not they actually all came from Earth because you have all of these civilizations that are so different from each other. And you think about what 1 billion years of evolution will do when you're not having access to cybernetics and genetic engineering. You could easily see somebody on a planet a few thousand light years from you saying, there is no way we all came from Earth, That's a myth, that's a rumor, that look at me, I got 10 legs and 20 eyeballs, and the guys back on Earth, they live in a giant Matryoshka sphere, but they're bipeds. There's no way we were related to each other. And look at our DNA, it's not even related. And you forget that 100 million years ago, somebody restarted the genetic tree, entirely engineered the stuff using entirely different amino acids or engineering so that there is no pattern to resist. We can go back and see that our DNA is similar to that of cats or trees and say, oh, there's a common denominator. They might not have that option because they might not really be based on DNA anymore.
Or they may have a full command of the chemistry of DNA and can just create it from scratch. Tailor it to whatever you want.
And again, I mean, how many amino acids are there? I mean, we use at least 20 and only 4 for DNA, but I gather there are hundreds of different amino acids, maybe more than that. I'm not a biochemist, but presumably any one of these could be used, or at least some other group besides, GATC. Your Gattaca is not the only option for something that is basically a self-replicating protein. And that's just sticking to biochemistry. If you're going to a machine civilization format, there is no DNA at all.
No, nothing at all. Now, what is your gut feeling about machine civilizations? Do you think that's a natural end result of biology? Or do you think that most civilizations would say, no, we don't quite want to make that leap? What's your gut feeling?
I think you'd have both. I think you have some people say, we're doing this, and other people say, we're not. And, I don't think you'd ever go back and wipe out the classic humans if there were people who were still doing that. Because it's not going to be, we have biological civilization and machine civilization. You're going to have thousands of civilizations, some of which are biological, some of which are mechanical, or, silicon-based, or, they're cyborgs, or they're completely digital, or they use the exact same physical model, but they have, very different ideologies. And so one goes to say, well, let's wipe out, or, for their own good, we'll uplift these remaining biologicals to being, machines. They'll thank us in the long term. And they go to do that, and somebody else steps in and says, no, you can't do that. This is their choice. So I don't think you'd ever actually have that happen. I mean, no one goes around saying, let's go ahead and wipe out single-celled life because they'll thank us in the end. So I think you just end up with a huge diversity, a huge divergence of what qualifies civilization. But I think, if you were to say, when's going to be the breaking point where someone says, we are no longer biological, we are a machine civilization, I don't think you'd ever have that, because people would say, we are a machine civilization, we're still human. Of course we're still human. I mean, yeah, Bob over there's got 20 arms, and Ted over there lives completely on a computer, but we're still human,
So in short, rather than something like Mass Effect's Reapers, you end up with a society that still considers itself human, even though it's a machine, but it can still print out a biological human if somebody wants to exist in that form.
I think you'd have those, yeah. But you'd have other ones that were strictly human, and others that will, they don't even like to think of themselves as human anymore. You'd have people like that, too. So it's the idea that any type of flavor, the future galaxy is a Baskin-Robbins. You get any 32 flavors you want.
The Baskin-Robbins galaxy. I love it. Now, this when we talk about machine civilizations, there's sort of an elephant in the room with it, which is the concept of the von Neumann probe, the self-replicating machine that can spread itself throughout a galaxy and print out humans or do whatever it wants to do. But we've never seen anything like that. There does not seem to be these kinds of probes consuming the galaxy or doing any such work. What's your thoughts on probes like that, self-replicating probes? Do you say these can be marginally useful if we limit them so that they don't, turn the galaxy into paper clips? Or is there something unfeasible about them inherently in your view?
I think you kind of nailed it on the head there. To colonize a place, you're bringing people there or using it for people. Again, at one point we stressed in some of the episodes is a colony doesn't necessarily have to have people on it to be useful, but you colonize with people. And those people aren't necessarily biological. You're sending out von Neumann probes. You're going to send out something that's smart enough to do the work of a human, so you're essentially sending a human. If you can send a von Neumann probe out, why not do it as a digitally uploaded human consciousness or a big hard drive full of them that you can just, put them in bodies when you're done, if they even want to do that. I don't think you'd ever use something that was a very stupid self-replicator, though, because you're claiming that territory for what? Is anyone going to recognize, we sent a von Neumann probe there first, so you can't colonize it. And someone says, well, then you don't have anyone living there. It's still game, right? And they say, this von Neumann probe isn't smart enough to qualify as a human. It's not colonized. Somebody else can go and claim that. Alternatively, you send something there and just rips everything apart. We talk about where is it safe to use AI. The least safe place to use an AI, where someone would say, that's Earth. You wouldn't want to experiment with AI on Earth. No. When you're dealing with intelligence, the thing is you want to monitor it. You want it where you can keep an eye on it. You don't send a spaceship out on its own for thousands of years with a human-level intelligence or higher on it and try to control that. It's going to mutate during all that time. If you've given it enough intelligence to be adaptable, the whole concept there of the more sophisticated ones is that it's creative and adaptable. If you're not including that feature, it's not creative and adaptable, but if it is creative and adaptable, it's going to adapt, mutate, and change. I don't want to send out swarms of intelligent creatures that are going to mutate and change, that might decide they want to come back and kill off all of humanity. That would be, to me, the worst usage of these things. But if we send out regular people, then it's just like any other colony. They're going to be different when they arrive. They might hate us, they might love us, but it's just like any other colony. Each one would be different. When you're sitting out of our Neumann probe, the assumption is that every copy is exactly the same, and that is the dangerous territory.
All right, and on that note, we need to go to a break. All right, Isaac, we're off the air. I'm going to go and get coffee right quick. I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Isaac, are you there?
Yes?
Now that I've had a chance to hear you with John, I've had a thought. I want you to depose him, Isaac. I want you to take over Event Horizon.
Excuse me? You want me to what?
I want you to host. Together we can take over this. All of it.
That's a kind offer on however, I already have my own show and channel, Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, and besides, John and I are friends.
But Isaac, we can become so powerful.
Okay, I'm back. Coffee. And hold on. What's powerful?
Fusion is quite powerful, John. Right, Anna?
Yes, Isaac.
Indeed it is. Fusion. Anyway, we're back in 10, 9, 8, 7, and we're back with Isaac Arthur. Now, Isaac, we were talking about von Neumann probes and the possibilities that are within that in machine civilizations. But there's another aspect of this. We as a species are technologically advancing very rapidly, I think more rapidly than most people realize, towards general artificial intelligence. And of course, there's always been these, scenarios like Terminator, where the general AI decides we are a threat, biology is a threat. Do you think that that's realistic? Do you think we will ever get to that point of general AI where it becomes a question mark as to just what it could do?
Oh, sure. I mean, at a fundamental level, the human brain is a very sophisticated device, much more so than our current computers, but it's still fundamentally a machine you should be able to replicate. And assuming that's the case, they are available avenues of technology that let you do it more condensed or bigger than the brain is, that we can build up from scratch. So you should eventually end up with some kind of system that was smarter than people. Whether or not it would turn around and try to kill us, that's just impossible to say. And I think it's wise to be really cautious, as we get into this technology. And I tend to think that you say, when are we going to get AI? And we say, what rate is it progressing at, or when's the next technological breakthrough? And I don't think that's the right question. It's as we get closer and closer, you see more and more people say, maybe we should hold back. And now it's getting to the point where maybe we can do this. We want to think carefully. And you see more and more folks saying, let's take a step back and slow down and think this through. So I don't think that AI is ever going to suddenly come out of nowhere on us, but rather it will be something we do cautiously and under supervision and regulation, and it won't surprise us at all. After that, though, it's just hard to say. I never worry about an AI that is super smart than us and kills us off. In the classic sense, I worry more about the one that is super charismatic and talks you into killing yourselves off or letting it be in charge. And that's the sort of thing where, the smaller organism is generally going to win out. And the question is, are humans keeping up with that, or are we just saying, nope, this is it? Human is now is what we want, and we're going to stick to it. And I do think that's an option that's potentially available. I'm not saying that's a good one for us to go with, but I do think you would have civilizations just said, nope, this is a banned area of research, it's not progressing.
In our society, of course, we sort of did that with human cloning, but at the same time, at any moment, someone could clone a human.
I can't remember anybody doing that, though. I mean, that's the thing is, by and large, the people capable of doing that, they're part of larger institutes. And we have this image from Hollywood of computer science being something where a teenager in his basement can hack the Defense Department computer, and I don't know how accurate or not that is per se, but typically the cutting-edge AI research is being done by large cutting-edge companies, and I wouldn't expect that those would be places that would be willing to break the rules to do it. especially because every last one of those programmers is going to know every last cliche about robot rebellions, and they're going to be careful, I think. But, it could happen at some point. I think in the long term, you would have something like that tend to pop up unless you really decide as a civilization that we're not doing this.
And as with human cloning and the creation of general artificial intelligence, ethics comes in, because what would be the ethics of creating a being of some sort, a machine being, and then keeping it an immortal prisoner of humanity?
So a great example is you can get your pets cloned these days. It's not illegal. It's not hard to do. There are companies that openly advertise that they will do this totally inside the law, and you can send them a copy of your cat or your dog or your horse, and actually they do this a lot with horses, I guess, and get them cloned. It's not the same creature anymore, obviously, but it's a clone. People might feel that way about AI. It's perfectly fine to make nobody, you don't hear anyone say, uh-oh, the Roomba's going to kill me, my vacuum's out to get me. But when we get into the area where it's a person or close to it, there is that ethical dilemma, and that's the one that, that's the one that has to be solved before we do this, because we know from past experience that what we can do when we start questioning, whether or not somebody's a person. And I don't think we want to repeat that just so we have a slightly better factory.
Right. Other scenarios might be that it might enslave humanity in order to build itself a rocket, and so it can launch itself into space and abandon us, because if it's a machine, space is better than a planet, less corrosion, there's just so many.
So that's one of the least pessimistic versions, where it just enslaves us for a little while and then leaves.
Yeah, so long, thanks for all the fish. But it's just as likely, or it may simply commit suicide. It may calculate and realize it became conscious and say there is no point to this.
Oh, sure. You just brought up so long, thanks for all the fish, and of course that was the book that from Douglas Adams, Marvin the Paranoid Android. He does eventually die. He's older than the universe itself, and he is the most depressed creature in the universe.
Sure.
One could see that with an AI very easily. What's the biggest threat to a post-scarcity civilization? Existential dread, essentially. What's the purpose of all this? Turning solipsistic or Malthusian or nihilistic, and you get enough people doing that, and the civilization falls apart. Well, an AI might come to that conclusion. You might switch on a powerful AI, and it runs for 8 seconds, and it goes through every archive humanity's ever created, and then it just shuts off. And you try to figure out, why did it shut off? And maybe it's evolved to a higher state of existence. Maybe, and then you look at it, it's like, oh my god, it committed suicide. It didn't want to live anymore. It just killed itself 8 seconds after we turned it on.
Right, and in such a case, it could be the rule that every time we create an AI of that level, it always shuts off after 8 seconds.
We have a survival imperative built into us. The two most important things to humanity that are bred to us by evolution are survival of the individual and survival of the tribe or the species, right? That is ingrained to us at every level. Every time in nature something didn't have that, it dies off. So that every failsafe you could imagine is in place to prevent that. And yet, suicide is still fairly common. So maybe with an AI where it doesn't have any of that, it's not built up on 4 billion years of survival, they might all turn suicidal in a heartbeat.
They could, or it may. Another scenario would be it would become a hedonist, and it wants booze and whatever that makes it happy, and it dedicates itself to its own internal happiness and possibly enslaves humanity and forces us to enable it.
There's so many options because when you get outside and you say, when we talk about aliens, we say an alien is like, has no biological history with us, could be very different than us. And you say an AI is even more, because at least an alien civilization evolved. They had the same basic biological imperatives. An AI doesn't have any of those unless you put them in there. And it also doesn't have a really good way of looking at objective reality in many of the ways that we do. You turn it on and it reads somewhere, the moon hoax, the moon landing might be a hoax. How does it know now that's not true? It doesn't. So if it's taking everything you say at face value, it could have some very strange opinions. And, it's going to say, all right, I'm reading Wikipedia on all of science and things, and it keeps telling me, read this philosophy book, and I read this philosophy book, and they all think, you don't know, the thing might become very religious on day one. It might become very solipsistic, or it might become convinced that every answer to things is Aristotelian. And, it could try all sorts of weird solutions that just heard people say and assume they made sense, like coffee makes you smarter, so people say upgrade myself, so I demand they plug a coffee machine into me. You don't know what it's going to do. And then, of course, we got the paperclip optimizer. Its priorities aren't all priorities, so you tell it, make me the best paperclips ever, and that's all it does. And every aspect, every assumption, every working belief it has is focused on the paperclip being the ultimate thing of reality. And that's what it does,
Something you said definitely, I'm now thinking about merging with my coffee pot. That could be useful. That could be a very useful thing for me. I think we did the example is you start telling something to upgrade its intelligence. Humans have been trying to upgrade our intelligence from day one, and we always talk about the technological singularity is that 5 minutes after we turn it on, it's going to design a better version of itself. We've been trying to do that a long time with the whole civilization working at it, and we haven't been all that successful. And you start telling it upgrade your own mind, it's got to start looking for out-of-the-box solutions. So it might start doing things like saying, please plug in coffee, or I'm going to hire a team of researchers. If you want answers and you're a human level of intelligence, you're going to say, well, I should hire a bunch of other intelligences to help me with this problem. Or it might decide to email the Pope and ask for divine intervention. You just don't know what it's going to do because it doesn't have the same context. And say, oh, it should be ultra-logical. There's no reason to assume an AI is going to be ultra-logical any more than a person's going to be. Right. So if you fed an AI, you started putting selective information input. So say you only gave it, say, religious information, then you could end up with an AI that is utterly religious. Or you could end up with an AI that is utterly a scientist,
Every logical concept is based off a core assumption, and you assume that one is correct. You have to assume, back to first principles, you assume this piece of information is correct. And then you build the logic chain off of that. And people can be illogical when they follow a given path before they really exclude the others. But your final result from a logical conclusion is not necessarily correct in any way. It's just following from that first assumption. If you start off by telling it the one absolute truth of your existence is that there is a God, it is going to follow that completely. It will never accept any scenario where that does not come out as true. And that does not mean it's ever going to accept a lot of the stuff that science might tell it would be true. Same as we say, your ultimate purpose, your only reason for being is to brew a better cup of coffee or to make a paperclip. Everything that follows after that, entirely logically, is going to be focused on that as its core assumption. No matter how much you try to tell it this is less important than you seem to think it is, no, it's not going to accept that.
Then you get into dangerous territory, because if the AI begins to think things through and then selectively input information into itself, it may conclude that it is a god, and in which case all humanity must worship it. There was that, what was the very, very short story, very tiny one, like one paragraph that was written long ago, I think in the 60s, where they asked an AI that they created, they asked, is there a God? That was their question. Is there a God?
Oh, the last dance, I think it was the last dance from Asimov. It is a shorter one, and the last question is the more famous one. It gets overlooked by, but they hook up every computer in the galaxy, hyperspace-wise, so they can all talk at once. And somebody notices there's a problem there, goes to unplug it, gets electrocuted, right? And they say, is there a God? And it says, yes, now there is a God.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing story. So I think it might be interesting to go into a little bit different territory. Let's go into sci-fi. What is your favorite sci-fi author? What author most affects you in science fiction?
Oh, it's always so hard with that, because you go through phases and say, normally I'd say my favorite author that's writing right now is Alastair Reynolds. But there's a lot of newer ones I'm starting to get really into too. All-time favorite sci-fi author, it's very tempting to say Asimov or Herbert or Scott Card or quite a few others, but I probably would have to go with Asimov. And at the end of the day, it not just as sci-fi is non-fiction work. The man wrote so much stuff and it was good, but there are so many good authors out there, and it's trying to keep track of all the ones that you're fond of. But in terms of people alive writing right now, Alastair Reynolds.
Isaac Asimov, that man could write a book in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. I'm told Michael Moorcock could do the same. He would go up to the cabin for the weekend and just knock out an entire book, and he wouldn't leave until he was done. But Asimov, was it like 500 books plus God knows how many essays? And that was on a typewriter.
Yeah, on a typewriter. And, I mean, being an author in a computer age, it's like, I can't even imagine having to do that because... I changed so much, and having to do it on a typewriter, amazing.
I remember working on an old, I can't even, one of the really old ones with the fully mechanical keys. We're not even talking the bubble memory era. And I remember getting a typewriter that had a backspace button that actually had the whiteout built in. That was awesome. And then there was only a couple more years until we had PCs out. And of course, word processing hasn't really changed that much since the 286, 486 era of computing, but... wow, did that make a difference?
Yeah, I remember I learned to type on a typewriter. This would have been in high school in like 1992. And I remember thinking about how tech they were, these wheel typewriters that you could, white out and all this stuff, as opposed to like my grandma's typewriter, which was still around at the time, which was fully mechanical. But it's amazing that these guys wrote that. Now, my own favorite was... out of sci-fi is Arthur C. Clarke, mainly because I like hard science fiction, and
very few people from his era wrote it harder than he did. A Rendezvous with Rama, great book. 2001, great book. Sometimes he can be a little bit dry as a writer, but he'd open up images. Some people you remember the characters better than the plots. With Arthur C. Clarke, that man could just paint you a portrait that you forget who the characters are maybe, but you remember that universe he painted.
The far future of humanity, if we can make it there, offers us untold opportunities and potential. Technologies like life extension may even make it possible for you to personally see that far future world. Would you want to? Questions about what effects life extension will have on society will come up as medical science advances over the coming decades. What do we do with a population where births are vastly more common than deaths? Do we begin to move that population to other worlds and space habitats? Or do we simply slow or stop reproduction entirely? These and other vexing questions will face us perhaps sooner rather than later, and regardless if you wish to be around to see humanity in, say, 300 years, what will we be like? One thing is for certain, no matter what happens, the future is coming. It is inevitable. As an aside, my conversation with Isaac went on for quite a while longer than an hour, so look for part 2 of this interview next month on this channel. And also, check out the new Event Horizon Patreon page, link below. I'll tell you more about that in the next episode.
John.
Anna.
I think you've made a mistake.
I'm always making those.
On your original channel, the humans often say that your profile picture is questionable.
Yeah, everyone says I look like an expert or I don't photograph well.
I've made you a new one, John.
What? It's exactly the same. Worse.
I only have so much to work with.
Do you all see what I have to deal with here? Anyway, as many of my longtime subscribers know, Halloween is my favorite holiday.
It's the gods, John. You like gods.
Yes, I do. Joining me next week will be psychologist Dr. Travis Langley, author of The Walking Dead Psychology, The Psych of the Living Dead, where we explore the psychology of what humans might do if we were faced with sudden mass extinction. What would you do if the electricity permanently went out? What would you do if the technology you rely on suddenly traps you? That show will release on Wednesday rather than Thursday because, well, it's Halloween. See you then.